A look at the legacy of the former Star Trek star Nichelle Nichols, best known for playing Lieutenant Uhura, who's died, age 89.
There are stories that only get told when time has run out. Stories that spend decades locked behind smiles, professionalism, and the unspoken rules of Hollywood silence. Nichelle Nichols carried one of those stories for more than 50 years. She carried it through conventions, through interviews, through standing ovations and honorary degrees, and through the quiet years when the world slowly began to forget how much she had given it. But before she left this world on July 30th, 2022, she finally let the truth come forward. What she confirmed about her years on the set of Star Trek shook fans, reframed history, and painted a far more complicated picture of television's most celebrated vision of the future. To understand what Nichelle Nichols revealed, you first have to understand who she was before the uniform. Born Grace Dell Nichols on December 28, 1932, in Robbins, Illinois, she was a child who refused to be ordinary. She renamed herself Nichelle because she wanted a name that meant something, Victorious Maiden, and that choice alone tells you everything about the spirit she carried into every room she ever entered. She trained at the Chicago Ballet Academy, performed with Duke Ellington and Lionel Hampton, and by the time she was in her 20s, she had already carved out a reputation as a serious, gifted performer on stages across the United States and Canada. When Gene Roddenberry offered her the role of Lieutenant Uhura in 1966, Nichols was not a struggling actress desperate for work. She was a woman with options, with talent, and with a clear sense of her own worth. That context matters enormously because what she agreed to endure on that set, and what she ultimately confirmed in her later years, was not the resignation of someone who had no choice. It was the sacrifice of someone who understood exactly what was at stake and chose to stay anyway. Lieutenant Uhura was unlike anything American television had offered a black woman before. She was not comic relief. She was not a servant or a background figure. She was the chief communications officer aboard the USS Enterprise, seated at the nerve center of the most advanced vessel in the known universe, and she was played with intelligence, elegance, and authority. In a single stroke, Nichols had done something that decades of Hollywood tradition had refused to do. She had placed a black woman at the table of the future. The cultural impact was immediate and profound. Young black girls across America suddenly had a face to put on their dreams. Whoopi Goldberg, who would go on to become one of the most recognized entertainers in the world, has spoken many times about the moment she saw Nichelle Nichols on screen as a child. She screamed through her house, calling her family to come and look at the television because there was a black woman on screen who wasn't playing a maid. That single moment, she has said, redirected the course of her life. Mae Jemison, the first black woman to travel to space, has credited Nichols as one of the reasons she dared to believe that space was a place she belonged. These were not small ripples. These were waves that changed the shoreline. And yet behind that carefully composed exterior, behind the red uniform and the warm smile and the grace that viewers saw every week, something else was happening entirely. Nichols confirmed in her later years what fans had whispered about for decades. The set of Star Trek was not always the harmonious, progressive utopia that its storylines preached. There were politics, there were ego battles, and there were quiet, persistent efforts to push Uhura, and by extension Nichols herself, toward the margins. Her lines were routinely shortened. Scripts would arrive with Uhura reduced to a handful of words, sometimes nothing more than functional responses, hailing frequencies "open, Captain," repeated week after week, while her male counterparts were given complex, character-building dialogue. Nichols noticed. She always noticed. She had the eye of a performer who understood the difference between being featured and being tolerated, and what she saw in those scripts told her that certain people in positions of power had decided Uhura's role was best kept decorative. Promotional materials were another battlefield. Nichols confirmed that she was frequently left out of publicity photographs and marketing campaigns. The crew of the Enterprise would be assembled for a studio shot, and somehow the image that ended up in the press would be missing her face. It happened enough times that it could not be accidental. Someone was making a decision repeatedly to erase her from the public-facing image of a show that privately celebrated diversity while publicly, in certain moments, practiced something far less noble. She also spoke about the experience of being on a set where not everyone shared Roddenberry's vision. The creator himself was, by most accounts and certainly by Nichols' own testimony, a genuine advocate. He believed in what he was building, and he believed in her place within it. But Roddenberry was not the only voice in the room. Producers, network executives, and others wielded influence over what made it to the screen, and not all of them looked at Nichelle Nichols and saw what Roddenberry saw. The most famous chapter of this story is the one Nichols told openly and emotionally in her later years, the story of the weekend. She came within hours of leaving Star Trek forever. After the first season, feeling overlooked, undervalued, and professionally restless, she made up her mind. She went to Roddenberry and told him she was done. She had been offered a role on Broadway, the world she had trained for and dreamed of since childhood, and she was ready to take it. Roddenberry, to his credit, did not beg or guilt her into staying. He told her to think about it over the weekend. If she still wanted to leave on Monday, he would let her go with his blessing. What happened that weekend is one of the most remarkable intersections of art and activism in American history. Nichols attended an NAACP event, and she was told that a fan wanted to meet her. She expected an enthusiastic viewer. Instead, she found herself standing before Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King did not simply offer a compliment. He told her with the seriousness of a man who understood exactly what was happening in America at that precise moment in history, that she could not leave. He told her that she was not just playing a character on a science fiction show. She was holding space, real, visible, undeniable space, for Black Americans in a vision of the future. He told her that his children watched Star Trek because of her. That families gathered around televisions across the country and saw, perhaps for the first time, a reflection of themselves in tomorrow. He told her that what she was doing was as powerful as any speech, any march, any act of protest, because it was changing what people believed was possible. Nichols returned to Roddenberry's office on Monday morning and told him she was staying. When she relayed what Dr. King had said, Roddenberry reportedly wept. It was confirmation of everything he had been trying to build, delivered by one of the most consequential voices of the 20th century. Among all the things Nichols confirmed before her death, she remained particularly proud of one moment, a moment that almost didn't happen, and would not have happened without her refusal to back down. In 1968, in an episode called Plato's Stepchildren, Lieutenant Uhura and Captain Kirk shared what is widely recognized as one of the first interracial kisses ever broadcast on American network television. NBC was afraid. The network understood the cultural climate. America in 1968 was a country torn apart by racial violence, political assassination, and deep divisions over civil rights, and the prospect of airing this scene during primetime filled executives with anxiety about advertiser backlash and viewer outrage in southern markets. They insisted on filming an alternate version without the kiss. What happened on set during those alternate takes is the kind of story that only gets better with time. William Shatner, by Nichols' own account, decided he was not going to cooperate with the network's cowardice. He deliberately sabotaged every take of the alternate version, making faces, breaking eye contact, ruining the scene over and over until the only footage that could actually be broadcast was the original. Whatever tensions existed between Shatner and Nichols, and she acknowledged over the years that their relationship was complex, in that moment, he stood firmly on the right side of history alongside her. The episode aired on November 22, 1968, and the response was not the catastrophe the network had feared. Yes, some viewers objected, but the letters that poured in were overwhelmingly positive. Fans were moved. They were proud. They felt, watching that scene, that television had finally caught up with the world they wanted to live in. Nichols later spoke about a letter she received from a white man in the American South who admitted he could not approve of what he had seen, but who also admitted, in spite of himself, that he had been affected by it. She held that letter as evidence of what art could do, not erase prejudice overnight, but plant something in the soil beneath it. Nichols was honest in her later years about the fact that her time on Star Trek involved a full range of human experience, not all of it good. Her relationship with William Shatner was layered. There were times when she felt sidelined or talked over, and the dynamic between their characters on screen did not always translate to warmth off it. But she also acknowledged that they found a mutual respect over time, and that in certain crucial moments, he showed up for her. Leonard Nimoy was, by her account, a different story entirely. Their friendship was one of the genuine treasures of her time on the show. Nimoy treated her as an equal from the beginning, with consistent, uncomplicated respect that she found rare in the industry. When she was struggling, when she felt invisible, when the smaller indignities of being a black woman in Hollywood accumulated into something heavier, Nimoy's steadiness gave her an anchor. She spoke of him with real warmth in interviews, and his passing in 2015 was a loss she carried visibly. George Takei brought laughter and lightness to the set in a way that Nichols treasured. DeForest Kelley, Dr. McCoy, was someone she described as genuinely kind in a world where kindness was not always guaranteed. These were the relationships that made staying bearable during the harder stretches, and she never stopped being grateful for them. When Star Trek ended its original run in 1969, Nichols did not disappear. She lent her voice to the animated series, appeared in 6 Star Trek films, released an autobiography in 1994 titled Beyond Uhura, Star Trek and Other Memories, and continued performing, recording, and showing up for her fans with the same energy she had always brought. But the chapter of her post-Star Trek life that she spoke about with the deepest pride was her work with NASA. In the years following the show, Nichols partnered with the space agency on a recruitment initiative designed to diversify its astronaut program. She traveled the country, using her face and her story and the reach of the character she had played to persuade talented women and people of color that space was their destination too. The results were extraordinary. Dr. Sally Ride, the first American woman in space. Colonel Guyon Bluford, the first African American in space. Judith Resnick, Ronald McNair, Frederick Gregory, Charles Bolden, these were names attached to history, and they were people who had responded to what Nichols was doing. She had taken the symbolic power of Lieutenant Uhura and made it operational. She had turned a television character into a recruitment tool for the actual future. In 2015, at the age of 82, she boarded a NASA research aircraft and flew an observation mission tracking Saturn and Mars from high altitude. She had played a character who lived among the stars for 3 seasons of television. She had spent decades pointing others toward the real sky. And then, finally, she got to go up herself. In June 2015, Nichols suffered a mild stroke at her home in Los Angeles. She recovered, but the stroke was the beginning of a slow narrowing of her world. In early 2018, it was announced that she had been diagnosed with dementia. She stepped back from public appearances, a withdrawal that cost her something real, because she had always found energy and meaning in the connection with fans. The final years brought legal complications as well, a conservatorship battle involving her son Kyle Johnson, and questions about who was making decisions on her behalf. It was a painful chapter for a woman who had spent her life being the one who made decisions, who had stood in front of cameras and negotiated with networks and stared down executives who wanted to make her smaller. She passed away on July 30th, 2022, in Silver City, New Mexico. She was 89 years old. The cause was heart failure. Her ashes, in a tribute that felt written for her, were sent into deep space, launched beyond the atmosphere of the planet she had worked so hard to improve, sent out among the actual stars she had spent a lifetime pointing toward. Before she died, Nichelle Nichols confirmed something important. Not a scandal, not a conspiracy. Something more nuanced and more valuable than either of those things. She confirmed that progress is rarely as clean as its mythology suggests. That the show which preached unity had not always practiced it. That being a pioneer means absorbing costs that the people who come after you never have to pay. That staying when leaving was the easier option was itself an act of courage. She confirmed that one conversation with a man who understood history and who looked her in the eyes and told her that what she was doing mattered had been enough to change her mind, and that changing her mind had changed the world in ways neither of them could have fully predicted at the time. She confirmed that the character of Uhura was not just a role. It was a door, and she had held it open with both hands for 50 years so that others could walk through. And she confirmed, finally, that the stars were always the right destination. Not because space is beautiful, though it is, but because looking up, believing you belong out there, is the beginning of every worthwhile journey any human being has ever taken. Nichelle Nichols took that journey. She made sure others knew they could too. And now, at last, she is exactly where she always belonged.